Welcome, this is Agony Duck, and today I'm gonna talk about Duck Mod. So, what is Duck Mod? It's a multiplayer balance mod created by me on the basis of feedback by other players. And the central design philosophy is basically this. I wanted to make every faction a good choice, and give every faction some options against other factions. So I wanted to avoid situations where if you picked Suebi, you had absolutely no chance against Arverni. So I wanted to change that. And I also wanted to reduce the power difference between elite units and other units. So basically I wanted the game to revolve more around bringing a well-rounded army with a lot of different units and have the game rely more on tactics than just pure power of your units. And I think I've succeeded with that. A third design philosophy for me was to make all unit types useful. I basically didn't want to have any units that would be worthless. So, and I think that also works. And fourth central design philosophy for me is just to fix the issues that CA does with or creates with their design decisions. So the key changes is that I pretty much adjusted unit cost to match power and faction specialization. So stronger units will generally cost more unless the faction is specialized in those units and doesn't exactly have too much variety or other options. So for example, Egypt will have to pay quite a lot for their Galatian Royal Guard, while the Arverni will have to pay a bit less because they don't have as many options. And then when you get to Suebi, the Swordmasters are weaker, but they're definitely cheaper. Another thing I wanted to do was to rebalance the stats so that formation attack being off wouldn't be such an issue. And if we, for example, compare the Praetorian Guard to some other units now, they only have 58 melee attack and 62 melee defense, which is quite a lot, but if we compare to the Oathsworn, the difference isn't as huge as it used to be. So generally the Praetorian Guard will tie with Oathsworn, more or less, depending on the charge. A third thing I wanted to do was just to reduce the difference between elite units and the core units. So for example, if we now compare veteran legionaries with Praetorian Guard, you'll notice that the difference is quite small actually. So in the end you'll have the elite units that will beat the regular units, but the difference is smaller and basically you want to bring elites to win key fights and to boost the morale of your troops, but you don't really want to bring all elites because you'll just get flanked to pieces. Fourth like key change I've done is I've made chariots and elephants weaker. Basically, I've reduced the mass of chariots and elephants, and I've increased the mass of infantry. And I've also adjusted the charge collision damage mechanics, so these heavy units will, well, they're toned down quite a lot, and you'll need to pick the moments when you want to engage with them, and you can't just send them in a blob and get 300 kills. If you do that, you'll probably get 50. So you need to decide when and where to charge in with them, and they're really deadly on flanking attacks, but not so much against braced infantry from the front. I've also reduced the effect of scare tactics, so basically flaming shots. They only do minus 10 morale damage now, and the scare units penalties are only minus 15. I've also reduced the power of the encourage aura, which is only 20 now, so I think the morale of the game now reflects more what's actually happening in terms of tactics. And also I've increased the rate and effect of fatigue, but I've also increased the rate of recovery when you're either walking or standing still, so it makes sense to walk your units now, and it also makes sense to rest them if they're exhausted. And another change I've done, which is actually quite crucial, is that I've reduced the spacing of the pike phalanx, which makes for a lot more denser pike phalanx. And to compensate for that, I've reduced their armor and defense. So now, when the pike phalanx is created, you'll actually see a very, well, I mean, it's a very dense wall of pikes. But at the same time, the pikes are a lot weaker against missile attacks and attacks from close range. So if a pike phalanx either gets pierced or flanked, it will take a lot of losses. And another change I've done is that I've increased cavalry speed, and I think that this brings out more important. I think this makes cavalry more important and makes it easier for cavalry to get into positions where it can do damage. Especially light cav is now very fast, so it's very good at dealing with missile units. Just a quick demonstration. I've also increased the acceleration and turning speed of shock cavalry to make it easier to disengage with them and to get them in the right position. In addition to that, probably a huge change that I've done is I've added 5 new factions to the game, and one of them is Armenia, which is basically a mix between Parthia and Seleucids. They have probably the best cavalry roster in the game, because they have both royal cataphracts and Azat knights and eastern cataphracts, and they have some axemen, infantry and noble spearmen, but they lack a lot of the options that either Parthia or Seleucids would have. Another one I've added is the Cantabri, which are an Iberian faction, and they have some really powerful noble cavalry, noble fighters, and some guerrilla warriors, scutari, spearmen, and other cool cav. And overall, the Iberian factions, I mean, the Cantabri need to rely more on their cavalry to win the battles, because their infantry is fast, but it's quite light. And the Iberian factions have, or the Cantabri have good attack and defense stats, but poor armor and morale. Another one I've added is the Getae, and they are heavily focused on spear units and infantry, and they have some of the best spearmen in the game. They also have the Dacian Falksmen, who are very deadly, but very vulnerable as well, so they're mostly useful for flanking. And their cavalry options are quite limited. But they do have bow horsemen, so they make for a pretty interesting combination. Another one I've added is the Lusitani. The Lusitani are specialized, another Iberian faction, and they're specialized in very deadly and lightly armored infantry. And as you might notice, their melee infantry is very lightly armored, but is very deadly in terms of attack and defense. But they're also fairly limited in cavalry and spear infantry. So they'll have to rely quite heavily on getting their melee infantry into the battle without being shot apart and getting picked apart by cavalry. So they're been one of the more trickier factions. And then finally we have the Odrysian Kingdom, also known as Thracia. And the Thracian nobles are, well, you might have encountered them before, but I've rebalanced them, and they're basically the ultimate shock infantry. But they're also very vulnerable to missile fire and cavalry, and they're mostly just good for 1v1 fights. So if they get outnumbered, they're gonna die. They have some good heavy cavalry, but absolutely no proper heavy infantry, and very limited choices in terms of spears. However, they do have some excellent peltist units and an excellent unit of heavy cavalry, and of course the Thracian cavalry for skirmishing. So with the Odrysians, you'll probably have to combine skirmishing with shock to use them successfully. And I forgot one key change as well. I've added Parthian shot for javelin cavalry, which means that they're actually useful against heavy cavalry now. So they'll be interesting to use. But anyway, I hope you try the mod and let me know what you think about it, because I basically keep adjusting things according to feedback, and I tend to update it as soon as I find that something is unbalanced. And I'll later do some more focused faction videos. But yeah, thank you for listening, and I'm sorry for being a bit of a mess in terms of well, I'm a mumbler and bumbler and tumbler. Yeah. Thank you.